The year is 2044. Mills Jacko, private eye, is on his last legs. The sky is covered with a metal nano solar shield to block all the vitamin D-filled sun rays. Americans are finally sick enough for the international bankers to unleash the army of robots. Humanity is doomed. Somewhere around 2022, give or take a few years, a law was passed, and you had to have a license to be a journalist reporter. Of course, only the international bankers could afford this license, so their children became the journalists and reporters. One of them wanted to talk to me desperately. There she was. She was knocking on the door. I agreed to an interview. I said, "What the hell?" So this is where the story begins. We exchanged pleasantries, and I offered her a shot of tequila. She refused, and I went ahead anyhow. Now, I normally don't trust journalists who don't drink, but she was pretty and I was desperate. What an old man will do for entertainment. It's sad. Well, we got right down to business. She basically wanted to know, "Mr. Jacko, when did you know that humanity was doomed? Was there any signs along the way?" That was her job. She was going to dig into my brain and try to figure out when it was. What year was it that you seen the signs? So I told her, the first time I really noticed it was when they had these self-operating buses. These buses that drove themselves with artificial intelligence. I said, this was around 2017, I told her. I said, this is when I knew that humanity was doomed. I mean, if we could not even drive our own vehicles, what use were we? And then I remembered. It was a cold day in November, I told her. I think it was 2017, and I turned on the news, and there it was, a self-driving bus that crashed on its very first day. We had a good old laugh, me and a youngster, but I tell you, mankind did not get it. Even then, on the first day they launched this self-driving bus, it crashed. But the humans went ahead and they still went with the international bankers' plan to put robots everywhere. And of course, somewhere down the line, the joke was, how many Americans does it take to change a light bulb? None, of course, because they were too sick to do it. That was the job of the robot. But the young, pretty whippersnapper, a daughter of an international banker, journalist, reporter, she didn't understand what I was talking about. She said, "What, Mr. Jacko? The Americans were too sick?" "Yes," I said, "sadly, before the army of robots showed up, well, there was a program instigated, a precursor, you might say. It was called Solar Shield. And they were to spray these chemicals, copper, barium, aluminum. They were all in nanoparticles, and the idea was to shield the Earth from the sun rays. But what these brain surgeons didn't realize was if you blocked the sun rays, of course you would block the vitamin D that the sun gave the humans. Of course, the humans got sick, and most of us died off. Only people left were the international bankers and their families and anybody who realized that somehow you had to come up with some vitamin D. Of course, vitamin D skyrocketed in price. Yes, it got too expensive for most Americans, so most Americans just had to pass away without vitamin D. Only the rich people could afford the vitamin D, and then the government put regulations and red tape in. Before you know it, you had to have a permit and a license to sell vitamin D. Well, that only put it on the black market. It became more expensive than gold and diamonds. Yes, it was the vitamin D peddlers who got rich. Yes, ma'am, it was a sad day in humanity. Well, the young, pretty whippersnapper, she looked a little depressed. She was down with a frown, and I said, "Well, what's bothering you, kid?" And she slowly looked up at me and she said, "Well, Mr. Jacko, my father has one of those licenses to sell vitamin D. It put me through college and got me this job as a journalist." And I said, "Well, what can I say, kid?" But since this is the end of the story, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I said to myself, if I was 40 years younger, I'd give her a dose of vitamin D that she would not soon forget. Yes, the year is 2044 at the retirement home of Mills Jacko, ex-Private Eye Noir.